The cockpit had gone dim enough that the yellow rings around the breaker keys looked brown. Dust drifted through the beam of my panel light. A crack ran across the left display where my helmet had struck it during impact. Beyond the armoured glass, the world kept flashing in hard white bursts from fires scattered across the plain and up the canyon wall. Each flash showed the same truth in pieces: wrecked armour, broken carriers, bodies on black stone, and my walker still upright by some stubborn act of weight and balance. I kept my hands moving because a cockpit full of alarms punished stillness. Reactor at 62% and falling. Main gun feed jammed after the fourth shell. Left arm gun mount gone. Right leg drive dragging, feedback spiking every time I flexed the knee. Cabin pressure steady for now. Air loop dirty. Filter load climbing. External mics half dead. Command net down to static. Burst cries, and one calm female voice repeating evacuation codes from somewhere far above me. My name is Nolan Hollister, Reserve Captain, Heavy Walker Corps, attached to the ground assault on Highport. Before the army pulled me back into uniform, I had spent most of my life on this world moving ore and fuel through the redstone cuts in machines built to carry more weight than common sense ever should. Men in offices liked to say a heavy walker felt like an extension of the body. Men who said that had never dragged one through bad ground with a split axle and a convoy clock burning behind them. A walker felt like work. Good work when the seals held and the servos answered. Grave work when something big had gone wrong. Something big had gone wrong all across the valley. The assault was supposed to open Highport in one hard push before dawn. Orbital strikes would break the defense rings. Drop battalions would cut the service roads. My battalion would take the canyon approach and hammer the lower shield bunkers while carriers rushed the freight slopes. That was the clean version. The real one began to come apart when the orbital feed died during descent and half our landing columns hit ground with blind maps. Then the dead in front of the bunkers started moving again. Then our own dead rose with them. I had seen infected footage during the briefings. Everyone had. Grey smear under the skin. Spikes of waste code in med implants. Muscle tissue hijacked by some crawling machine plague that rode signal traffic, body heat, and power flow. The briefings showed lab pens and restraint slabs and neat short clips of bodies jerking under white light. They had no room for what happened when thousands of fresh dead lay mixed with shell casings, broken armor, gun parts, med gear, field radios, loader claws, shattered drone rotors, and the raw current bleeding out of a battlefield. A body hauled itself over the hood of a burned carrier 30 yards ahead of me. White bones showed through torn meat at the shin. A chest plate from one of ours had sunk into the ribcage and sat there as if the corpse had grown around it. The right forearm ended in a rifle, the stock chewed away, the receiver buried in flesh up to the ejection port. The thing used the weapon as a crutch while it climbed. A second one rose behind it with a broken faceplate welded into the side of the skull like a second jaw. I reached for the external guns on instinct. The left trigger gave me dead pressure. The right arm answered with a low feed growl and one short burst. The rounds tore the first corpse open and spun the second off the carrier. Both bodies kept twitching while bits of armor and bone drew inward toward the ruin of a tank split open farther out on the plain. Cables dragged across the rock. A wheel hub rolled uphill by itself. Something big under that wreckage pulled metal and flesh toward its center. I cut the arm gun. Each burst mattered now. The port voice came through again, clearer this time, and I killed the static filter to hear it. Highport quarantine tower to surviving ground elements. Primary gates sealed, airfield lanes sealed. Cargo tower under internal lock. Any surviving personnel move to marked emergency shelters or defensive strongpoints. Challenge grid follows. A string of codes spilled out. I copied none of them. My left display was cracked. My uplink was shredded, and the shelters lay across open ground already full of moving dead. Strongpoints were for troops with numbers, ammunition, and walls that still stood. Highport sat on the canyon rim behind a line of shield towers and cargo cranes. The main road climbed there through the redstone cuts, and I knew every bad bend of it. I knew where the old mine company had blasted shelves into the walls, knew where the ore seams bent close enough to the surface that storms of charged scrap used to dance through the gaps when haul trucks dumped broken drill heads and torn track plates. Knew the freight ascent under the starport, a buried lift road built to bring ore trains to the smelter stacks before Highport ever turned into a military hub. I had driven those lower grades in civilian coveralls, with coffee in a dented thermos and shift whistles carrying down from the rim at dawn. Now I was coming back up under armor to help smash a port I had once hauled for. If any gate on this world still had a chance of opening for a handful of survivors, it was somewhere above that old freight route. The open flats between me and the port were a graveyard of half-burned armor and dead signal towers. My walker would die out there. In the canyon I had walls, grades, and a road cut for machines with ridiculous weight. That road had scars, narrow turns, and one bridge at the lower ravine where half a dozen wrecks could jam into a crossing after a collapse. I got the right arm around, forced the walker to pivot, and limped toward the canyon mouth. Every step sent a grind through the right leg drive. The cockpit floor tapped against my boots in ugly little shocks. Outside, the walker's weight pressed broken earth flat and cracked loose sheets of clinker from the roadbed. The engine note behind my seat had dropped from a steady work growl into a rough cycling thrum that told me the coolant path on one side had taken rubble. I heard all of it the way another man might hear his own joints after a cold night. Bodies covered the approach in drifts and clumps where units had died trying to retreat into the canyon. Some wore our black assault shell. Some wore the pale, segmented armor of the port defenders. Death had made them equal, and the plague found no reason to care which side had paid for them. A hand moved under a carrier tread. A face turned toward me with one eye gone and a length of data cable sunk through the cheek and into the neck. A knot of corpses had fused around a dropped med frame so that the frame's white support ring sat above them like a collar of bone. The canyon took me in with steep red walls rising on both sides. Shell scars pocked the rock. Fires crawled across patches of spilled fuel. The road narrowed and bent left around a row of toppled loaders. I passed 3 dead walkers from my battalion in less than 5 minutes. One had gone down on its face and dug a trench with its own skull. Another sat against the wall with the entire cockpit blown open, pilot still strapped inside under a crust of black glass. The third was gone from the waist down. The upper hull lay twisted across the road, arm guns sunk into the dirt, and something had been feeding from the exposed internals. I kept moving. The ravine crossing appeared at the next bend, and my stomach tightened into a hard knot of numbers and weight and old road instinct. The bridge was still there in the broadest sense of the word. The road had collapsed into the cut sometime during the assault. In its place, 5 wrecked machines had fallen and wedged together from wall to wall. 2 tanks, 1 ore loader, 1 burned carrier, and the front half of a walker from the port side had locked into a slanted, unstable causeway over a drop deep enough that the fires below looked like lamps at the bottom of a shaft. Metal plates hung loose over open air. A snapped crane arm from the loader had speared into the opposite wall and held part of the mess in place. The road on my side had broken clean at the lip, leaving a 6-yard step down onto the first tank hull. I stopped and leaned toward the glass until my forehead touched the rim of the cracked display. Below the bridge, the ravine floor had become the center of something worse than the scattered infected on the plain. Bodies and armor lay piled in black heaps among the rocks. Those heaps kept shifting. A tank turret rolled across the stone on a bed of joined limbs. A chain of bodies dragged a twisted gun carriage toward a mound of plate and flesh that rose shoulder-high off the ravine floor. The mound flexed around a core of blue-white arc light. Each flash made spent casings, knife blades, mag clamps, shrapnel, and loose teeth jump toward it. I saw the shape of a face sink into the outer layer and vanish under a wash of scrap a second later. I had crossed bad bridges in ore country. Weight made its own lessons. A driver learned to watch how a span settled, where the support took load, how much flex a bolt line could carry before a joint walked sideways and let gravity collect its due. This crossing demanded that kind of attention. Every move would need to count. I ran a quick survey with the right arm camera. The first tank hull had enough width for 1 foot if I angled the walker in from the shoulder. The second wreck sat lower and would take the next step. After that, I would need to shift left and put part of the walker's mass against the canyon wall, using the anchor winch to keep the upper body from swinging out over the drop. "Hollister, to any surviving ground unit in the Redstone lower cut," I said over local. "I'm at the ravine bridge. If anybody answers, keep it short." Static washed through. A burst of screaming cut in and died. Then silence. I switched to the maintenance channel and killed every feed I did not need. The dashboard darkened one panel at a time. Tactical overlays gone. Squad transponder grid gone. Long-range rescue ping still live, set by the suit system after impact. I stabbed at the control twice before it obeyed. The ping carrier light stayed green. "Come off," I muttered. "Come off." The system ignored me. The housing had probably jammed under the outer skin during the crash. I would have to rip it out by hand later. Movement stirred below. Dozens of heads turned upward together. The rescue ping was singing to them. I dropped the external ammo bin from the left rear mount. The clamps blew with a hard crack, and the bin tumbled into the ravine, trailing linked shells. Pain ran through me sharper than it should have. Those rounds were days of training and life and chances thrown away in a second. The walker stood a little easier afterward. Forward load shifted back where I needed it. I armed the right side anchor line and shot it into the wall across the bridge. The spike punched deep into red stone. The winch line went tight with a metallic groan that travelled through the hull and into my seat. "Easy," I told the machine. "Easy now." The first step put the right foot onto the top of the tank hull. The bridge dipped. Loose plating slid off the far side into the darkness. The walker's torso listed left, and the anchor line sang under strain. I eased the left foot down onto the broken road lip and bled power through the knee joints until the frame settled. Second step. The left foot came onto the first hull. Something below pulled at the ankle with a series of hard knocks as bits of scrap tried to climb the leg. I shook them off and felt the right drive answer with a protesting grind. Third step. I moved the right foot onto the carrier wreck and pushed the upper body hard toward the canyon wall. The shoulder scraped rock. Stone burst away and pattered down through the bridge. The anchor line kept me from swinging out. Below, the mound in the ravine had grown higher. It was finding shape. 2 arm-thick bundles of joined bodies rose from its sides and hooked into the underbelly of the bridge. I brought the left foot after it. The bridge shifted under my weight in a long, slow slide that felt like a beast drawing breath. The first tank hull peeled away at the rear and dropped. The whole causeway jerked downward by half a yard. My head struck the seat frame. Warning lights flared across the cracked display, right leg torque spike, hip alignment off by 6 degrees. I saw the path ahead in pieces, the burned carrier, the loader's engine deck, the sheared front half of the enemy walker jammed at the far lip. Beyond it, solid road. I could make it. I stepped for the loader. Something hit from below with enough force to rock 300 tons of armoured frame. One of the body bundles had reached the walker's left ankle and wrapped itself around the joint. Faces flashed past the camera, half buried under armour scraps and lengths of cable. A machine gun barrel jutted from the mass and fired upward on pure accident or blind purpose, rounds sparking off my lower hull. I stamped down, crushed the thing, and the bridge gave way under the blow. The loader deck tilted. My right leg plunged through a burst seam and wedged to the knee. Alarm shrieked. The upper hull pitched forward. The canyon wall rushed past the glass on my left. I fired the chest thrusters once, short and savage. Heat slapped the hull. The walker heaved upward enough for me to wrench the right leg free. I threw my weight against the left controls and dragged the machine onto the enemy walker's broken torso. The bridge behind me collapsed in a roar of tearing steel and falling stone. The far lip came up under the right foot. I shoved every reserve into one lurching final step and landed on the road beyond the ravine. The anchor line snapped behind me with a sound like a gunshot and whiplashed into the dark. I sat there for 3 seconds with my hands locked around the controls and my mouth open under the helmet seal, drawing air that tasted of filter grit and hot metal. The ravine mass had survived the collapse, more than survived. It had found a road upward in the ruins. A dozen infected dragged themselves over the broken lip where the bridge used to meet the far side. They came in jerks and lunges, hauled onward by limbs wrapped in torn armor and lengths of comm wire. Behind them, the bigger thing in the ravine kept climbing through its own dead. I turned the walker and marched. The air warning came on half a minute later. Filter load had jumped into the red. The intake trench ran along the outer spine under a set of armoured fins that could shrug off shrapnel and most small arms fire. It could not shrug off the slurry thrown up when the bridge went down. The screens had caught corpse matter, rust flakes, and whatever grey crawling rubble the plague used to move from body to body. Cabin pressure began to dip in slow, ugly steps. The suit reserve would keep me breathing a while if I sealed the helmet and killed the cockpit feed. After that, I would have a dead machine around me and nowhere to go. The road bent through a narrow slot between 2 leaning walls of red rock. A wrecked ore hauler blocked part of the lane there. I put the walker in its shadow, braced the right side against the canyon wall, and locked the stance. The engine dropped to idle. Every impact from outside came clear through the hull now, little drumming blows from infected bodies reaching the machine. I opened the emergency locker, pulled the maintenance rig over my armor, and checked the suit seal at the wrists and neck. My hands shook once when I tightened the right glove. I hated that. I tightened it again and clipped the intake tool pack to my belt. A corpse slammed against the hull right outside the cockpit. The sound came through the armor like a sledge to a steel door. "Still here," I said to the empty seat behind me. The maintenance hatch opened into the dorsal access trench, a cramped crawl space between outer armor and the intake duct. I hauled myself through and sealed it behind me. The walker's outer skin held the heat of the engine. Dust and black paste coated the trench floor. The service lamp on my shoulder threw a cone of white over the blockage ahead. It looked like a butcher's drain after a flood. Flesh, cloth, blood-black foam, chipped paint, shell links, hair, teeth, lengths of cable and grey, stringy matter jammed the filter grate into a solid plug. The fan behind it whined in short, ragged bursts, trying to draw air through a wall of rot and metal. The hull rang below me as bodies struck it. Fingers scraped along the outer plates. One hand stripped to red muscle, and brass cartridge rims fused around the knuckles, hooked over the lip of the trench ahead. I drove the service spike through the wrist joint and kicked the hand away. Work had always come easiest when I could reduce it to parts. Tool, blockage, flow, risk, motion. Do one task, then the next. I got the grate loose with the cutter. The first slab of filth came free in a wet collapse and dropped into the fan housing. The rotor seized with a brutal clank. I cursed, dug both gloved hands into the mess, and pulled it out in fistfuls, while the walker shuddered under impact. Something struck the outer skin with enough force to dent the plate beside my left shoulder. A rifle muzzle punched through the seam inches from my visor and spat 2 rounds into the trench. One hit the duct wall and burst sparks over me. The second smashed the service lamp. Darkness swallowed the trench. I froze for 1 beat, switched to visor light, and got back to work. The fan housing cleared enough for the blades to turn. Air rushed through with a rough spinning growl. The flow meter on my wrist climbed from critical to poor. Good enough for the next mile. Good enough if luck had not left the canyon entirely. The rescue ping housing sat another 6 feet down the trench under a blister plate. That green carrier light in the cockpit had told me the truth. The ping was still calling. Every dead thing in range would keep coming until I shut it down. I crawled forward on elbows and knees, while the hull thudded under me. The blister plate had jammed inward from some earlier impact. I got the pry bar under one edge and forced it open. The rescue unit sat in its nest with the casing bent. The hardline had welded itself into the socket during the crash. I put the cutter to it. The cutter bit, sputtered, and died when something jerked my right ankle backward. I turned in the trench and slammed the heel of my left boot into a face below the lip. The face came apart from the nose down and still kept trying to climb. More hands reached after it. A length of comm wire whipped across my calf and tightened. I tore the dead wire free, rolled onto my side, and chopped through the rescue hardline with the manual saw. It took 3 savage strokes. The carrier light on the unit went dark. The hands below lost some of their frenzy at once. They still climbed and struck and scraped, but the pattern had gone loose, robbed of the signal they had been following. I tried to pull back. My right sleeve snagged on a torn flange under the blister plate. The metal ripped a line through the suit fabric from elbow to wrist. Cold seal foam burst from the emergency weave and spread under my glove in a tight, prickling sheet. I stared at the rip for one short, stunned second. Grey-black paste from the trench had smeared inside the cut before the foam finished setting. The suit integrity panel on my wrist went from amber to green, which felt like a lie. The seal had to hold. I gave myself that and kept moving. The hull boomed again, a deep hit this time. Something heavier had reached the walker. I got the grate back into place, dogged it tight by feel, and crawled for the hatch with every bruise in my body counting time. Hands found the trench edge behind me. A rifle stock hammered the plate near my boots. I jammed the hatch cycle and rolled through just as fingers stabbed after me through the narrowing gap. The cockpit felt close and hot and human in the best possible way. I sealed the hatch, locked the maintenance access, and slumped into the pilot cradle, while the air system coughed grit through the vents. Filter life had dropped to 1/3. I pulled off the outer glove and looked at my forearm seal. The foam patch had set hard. The pressure line held. Nothing visible had crossed through to the skin. I put the glove back on and lied to myself with full awareness. I could worry later. Later had to exist first. The road climbed into the old mining cuts. The rock walls opened into wider shelves and scarps where the company had bitten into the canyon for a century before the port came. Abandoned rail spurs hung over drops. Broken drill towers leaned against the walls. Piles of spoil and dumped machine parts lay everywhere under wind-blown dust and shell scars. The first magnetic surge hit my sensors before it hit the hull. Static ran across the screens in white bands. The compass spun, the right side camera blanked. Then a storm of loose scrap came skittering down the slope from my left in a shrill metallic rush. Drill teeth, cut chain, shell fragments, snapped tools, bolts, and lengths of rail brace slammed into the walker's legs and armor. Half of it bounced away. The other half stuck for 2 seconds under the pull of the ore seam and then ripped free again when the surge passed. I knew this ground. Redstone's lower cuts had always done that when the ore veins near the wall took a charge from weather or bad mining current. On a bad day, a truck could lose half its tool rack to a canyon wall. On a worse day, the storm would pack rubble into a wheel housing and leave the truck dead in place until a crane dragged it free. My walker had no crane. I switched every guidance aid I could spare to passive and drove by old road sense, slope line, and the memory of running freight through here before the army had painted over the mine company signs. The world narrowed to the road 10 yards ahead. The rise of each shelf and the harsh metal chatter of more scrap storms rolling somewhere deeper in the cuts. A voice burst through local comm so suddenly that I almost put the walker into the wall. Any unit on Redstone Main, answer now. Carrier overturned inside cut 6. Survivors inside. Answer now. Male voice, young, frayed at the edges. I keyed the mic. This is Captain Nolan Hollister. Give me a marker. A burst of static, then, blue flare, north wall, side cut 6, we can hear you. We've got wounded. Then the voice came again, smaller this time. Please. The world had been full of men saying please over bad radios for 12 hours. Most of them were dead now. Maybe all of them. I turned into side cut 6. The troop carrier lay on its roof against a rock shelf, nose crushed, rear access jammed under a pile of bodies and torn gear. Blue flare smoke bled upward from a cracked hatch near the rear axle. The carrier's side guns had fired their last belts empty into the slope above it. Bodies covered the ground around the wreck in a mound that looked, at first, like the common dead of a retreat cut down in a choke point. Then the mound shifted. A shoulder plate rose and sank again. A cluster of fingers opened under a wash of dirt. Gun barrels stuck from the heap at wrong angles, half swallowed. The whole pile gave a slow, inward draw as if heat from the trapped carrier pulled it tight. A gestation nest. Field Rumour had used 10 names for them. The army preferred emergent bio-salvage complex. Men who had cut them open and survived called them meat foundries, which came closer to truth. I brought the walker to a halt over the carrier and keyed the external speaker. Anybody alive in there? Sound off. A woman answered at once. 3. Driver dead, rear section pinned. We've got 1 serious casualty. Names. Grace Holloway. Traffic control attached to High Port Command. Travis Boone. Mason Rudd. Medic. The title hit me harder than the name. Traffic control. A living map of port access and quarantine law sitting upside down inside a dead carrier. I brought the right arm gun down over the mound and checked the ammo count. A little over 100 rounds on the feed. Not enough to sweep the whole cut if the nest came apart at once. Plenty to dig a hole where I needed one. Mason moving. Still awake, Grace said. He keeps telling Boone not to waste the painkillers on him. A rough laugh came from inside the carrier, then turned into a cough. Mason, a person, not just a problem. Travis Boone cut in, all hard edges. Either get us out or get moving, Captain. That pile is working. I looked at the main road behind me. Dust hung there in a long grey ribbon. Through it, far off, shapes were gathering. The wall from the ravine had found the upper cuts. I dropped the walker into kneel mode, locked the right leg, and used the arm gun in short, disciplined bursts to carve a trench through the mound at the carrier's rear. Flesh, armour, and cable blew apart in wet chunks. The pile convulsed. Bodies under the top layer started to rise, dragging pieces of each other with them. One came up with both arms wrapped around a field printer unit sunk into its back like a shell. Another had a line of med injectors punched through the cheek and into the neck, the plungers flexing as the jaw worked. I stepped down from the cockpit with the boarding cable clipped to my belt and the cutter in my right hand. The first infected reached me before my boots hit the carrier's flank. It came low, pushing with a welded mess of shield plate and forearm bones. I drove the cutter through the neck and felt the body twist around the blade without care for the damage. Boone leaned out through the cracked hatch above me and fired a pistol into its face until the skull came apart. About time, he said. He had a broad, plain face, 40 or close to it, shaved head gone to stubble under dried blood, one eye swollen half shut. He wore troop carrier grey with the rank patches ripped off. The habit in that alone told me plenty. Men tore rank patches when they feared being taken alive by the wrong side, or when they had stopped trusting the chain that gave them rank. Keep your fire off my back, I said. Then move faster. Grace Holloway came into view behind him, wedged in the hatch frame. She was younger than the voice had sounded, maybe mid-30s. Dark hair cut short under a traffic control cap, cheeks split open to the jawline where something had thrown her against the ceiling during the rollover. Her eyes were clear. That mattered more than anything else in the moment. Rear bulkhead is bent into the bay, she said. The only clean way is through the floor plate by Mason. I got my shoulder against the wreck and hauled myself up. Inside, the carrier stank of hot wiring and blood and the copper reek of men running out of luck. Gravity had turned the compartment into a ceiling world. Mason Rudd hung in his harness with one hand pressed over a seal patch on his side. His skin had gone pale under the cabin lights, but when he saw me, he managed a ghost of a grin. "Captain," he said. "Cut here. Boone says you're too old to eyeball a seam." "Boone says a lot. He's loyal that way." It was a medic's kind of joke, made for a room that needed one. I braced, set the cutter, and burned through the seam while Boone kept firing through the hatch at anything that moved outside. The nest woke all around us. The carrier rocked as bodies threw themselves against it. One of the side guns outside began firing single rounds where current flashed through a broken feed. The floor plate dropped. Boone kicked it aside. I got Grace down first and shoved her toward the walker's boarding sling. She did not waste time thanking me. Boone came after her with the pistol still snapping. Mason tried to lower himself and the seal patch on his side gave way. Dark blood sheeted down his armor. I caught him under the arm and took more of his weight than my right shoulder wanted to give. He was light in that bad injured way where a man had started to leak out of himself. "Can you walk?" I said. "For a minute." "Then use it." The mound split open around us. A torso rose with half a radio mast sunk along the spine like a backbone from another species. 3 corpses climbed over the carrier roof with their legs tangled together under a net of cable and torn uniforms. Boone shot one and the others kept coming because they shared enough of each other to go on. I put the cutter through a knee joint made of shin bone and gunmetal and kicked the whole knot into the spoil slope. Grace made the walker sling and started hauling herself up toward the access bay. Mason stumbled. I took his belt and dragged him after me while Boone backed toward the walker, firing in hard, measured pairs. One round hit a fuel can on the carrier rack. The blast washed the cut in white heat and threw dirt, body matter, and metal in every direction. I lost my footing, went to one knee and felt something rake my damaged suit sleeve. Then Boone grabbed the back of my armor and hauled. Between the two of us, we shoved Mason into the sling and got him up. The walker's access bay was built for ammo techs and maintenance men, but it's sealed. In that moment, it might as well have been a fortress. I got Boone in after Mason, sealed the hatch, and climbed to the cockpit with the right arm gun, firing blind bursts through the external camera feed. The nest had broken apart under the blast and was already reforming around the scraps. The dead came after the walker in 2s and 3s as I rose to full height and backed onto the main grade. Grace dragged herself into the jump seat behind me and clipped in with hands that moved fast and sure. Boone stayed in the bay with Mason, swearing at the medkit. "You really are traffic control?" I asked as the walker turned uphill. "Senior traffic chief," she said. "Civil side before the army took half my staff, most of my hangars, and every habit the port had that made sense. Can you get a gate open?" "I can get you to the only gate that might still answer. Freight ascent under the old smelter line. Cargo tower watches it. Quarantine office sits on the same stack. If the systems still talk to each other, I can argue with them." "Argue?" She looked past me through the glass at the road. "Captain, what are those things behind us?" I let the camera zoom. The ribbon of dust down canyon had thickened into a moving front. Bodies climbed over wreckage and each other in a broad, advancing wall of flesh, armor, and junk metal. It had no clean edges. Every time part of it fell, another part filled the space. Weapons buried in the mass fired at random as current or impact tripped them. Limbs worked under plates. Faces surfaced and sank. "The battlefield," I said. "Coming to collect." The access bay speaker clicked on. Boone's voice came through. "Mason's bleeding into the deck. I sealed it again. He says he got brushed during the pullout." "Brushed how?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "It matters enough that I asked." A pause. Then Mason, thin and trying for steady. "Something from the mound got my neck plate open for a second. Boone jammed it shut. Still owe him for the bruises." Grace closed her eyes once and opened them again. "If he's contaminated, Highport will shoot the whole bay through a vent before they let us inside. He's alive right now, I said. Boone's face hardened. Your machine, Captain. The old cuts narrowed above side cut 6. Scrap storms rolled off the walls in harsh metallic sheets every few minutes now. I drove slow and heavy, feeling the grade through the walker's feet. Passive mode had blinded most of my long-range sensors, but Grace's knowledge made up ground the machines had lost. She called each bend, each shelf, each buried drain line from memory, as if she had spent her life drawing maps in the dark. Keep to the inside on this turn, she said. The outer edge washed out during the spring melt 3 years ago. I filed for repair twice. Command turned the crews into bunker labor. I obeyed and heard half the road crumble away under the walkers passing. Boone climbed into the cockpit an hour later, leaving Mason strapped into the bay with medgel and a waterline. He moved like a man who had spent his whole career expecting to fight in spaces far smaller than comfort allowed. He kept the pistol in hand and sat on the deck with his back to the bulkhead instead of taking the empty tech seat. He's going bad, Boone said. Define bad. He's talking to people who aren't here. Veins at the edge of the wound have gone grey. Skin around his neck cut looks like somebody drew wire under it. Grace rubbed both palms over her face. How long? Sometimes hours, she said before I could ask. Sometimes less. Depends on load, injury, exposure, powered implants, signal traffic, half a dozen things the med people were still arguing over when I left the tower. Boone looked at the dead display over my shoulder. Then solve the problem now. He stays alive while he can, I said. Boone's one good eye settled on me with cool, flat anger. And when he starts trying to open the hatch from inside the bay? I pushed the walker through another scrap surge. Bits of iron and shell casing rattled down the armor in a hard, metallic rain. Then I deal with that. That answer gets us buried. Grace leaned forward between us. Both of you listen. The plague follows more than bodies. It follows systems, med tags, rescue pings, armor handshakes, auto-targeting wake-ups. Last week we had dead dockhands climbing 3 stories of gantry because a crash beacon on a loader kept cycling. A quarantine gate came apart because a triage scanner tried to sync with patient tags inside a pile of corpses. She pointed at the disabled panels around me. Every active war system on this machine is a dinner bell. I thought of the rescue ping under the blister plate and the way the dead below the trench had lost some of their pattern when I cut it. Thought of the bridge mast turning toward my walker. Thought of this whole war being fought by men who trusted every emergency system they carried. Then we go dark, I said. Grace gave a hard nod. As dark as a 300-ton walker can go. I shut down the last active targeting loops, the vehicle identification beacon, the friend or foe query cycle, and half the comfort systems that fed the cockpit. The displays dimmed further. The engine note changed, rougher now without the balancing draw of all the systems I had just killed. The walker became a brute thing again, closer to the hall crawlers I had once driven than any sleek battlefield myth. The road answered that choice with its own price. Driving blind in Redstone's upper cuts meant every shelf and storm had to be read through the feet, the wall line, and the rhythm of falling rubble. I knew how. The knowledge cost years. Those years paid out now, one careful step at a time. The wall behind us kept coming. I saw it in glimpses through dust and bends. A broad slope of moving dead forcing itself uphill through old wrecks and fresh rockfall, taking in everybody it touched. The nearer it came, the more of the battlefield it wore. Walker plate, carrier track, port shield mesh, crates, loader claws, broken stretchers. I saw one of our fallen heavy guns sunk through the mass at shoulder height, its barrel swinging as joined limbs beneath it adjusted the angle. It fired once. The shell hit a canyon wall 200 yards below us and blew a section of shelf into the road. The blast wave slapped the walker broadside. Rock crashed down ahead in a rain of red slabs and black dust. I threw the machine toward the inside wall. Stones hammered the hull. One block the size of a cart struck the right thigh joint and sent the drive feedback into the red again. "Road's blocked," Grace said. The shelf ahead had collapsed into a jagged heap. Beyond it, the main grade vanished behind more falling rubble. We had room for nothing bigger than a man on foot along the outer edge. An old blast gallery opened in the wall to our left, half buried under spoil. I knew it before Grace named it. "Service cut," she said. "Old vent tunnel. It runs parallel for half a mile and comes out above the choke." The opening had been drilled for mine air and loader access, not walkers. My machine could fit if I scraped half its skin away. "Good enough," I said. Boone swore. "You'll wedge us." "Then I'll wedge us closer to the port." I turned the walker into the blast gallery. Armor shrieked against stone. The right shoulder stripped away a line of antenna stubs and outer plating. Dust poured over the glass. In the bay behind us, Mason began muttering in short, broken bursts, repeating med codes and women's names I did not know. The tunnel floor dipped and rose over old rail beds. The walls pressed so close that my arm gun gouged sparks with every step. Twice I had to stop and use the damaged right arm to tear support struts out of the way. Boone left the cockpit to wedge spare plating over the bay hatch because Mason had started striking it from inside. When the tunnel widened enough for me to breathe again, I heard Boone through the intercom. "He's asking for his daughter." Grace bowed her head once. His file said divorced, 1 child. I kept my hands on the controls and the walker inching forward. "Keep him talking." Boone answered after a pause. He asked if we were still in the carrier. A harder pause followed. Then he said, "I told him we were halfway home." The tunnel opened above the choke into a steep shelf road running straight for the final ascent. Highport rose at the far end on its rim of black stone and steel. Towers ringed the landing field. Cargo cranes stood against the sky like bare ribs. Fires burned in a cluster near the civil pads. One shuttle lay broken on its side near a hangar mouth. Another shape lifted from a distant launch tower and climbed into the dark in a white spear of engine flame before vanishing into cloud. Grace saw it too. Her face tightened with something I knew at once. Counting. We were all counting exits now. The final ascent looked worse than I remembered. The main military gate at the top had sealed with blast slabs. Below it, the old freight approach zigzagged under the cargo stack through concrete shells and ore conveyor housings left from an earlier century. One broad switchback road climbed to a recessed freight mouth under the port. If Grace could open that mouth, we had a way in. If she could not, we had a wall and the dead behind us. A blow hit the bay hatch hard enough to ring through the whole frame. Boone came on the intercom at once. "He's gone. Open the lock, or I do it from here." I halted the walker on the lower switchback and pulled the bay camera to the main screen. Mason Rudd stood in the cramped access space with his back bent under the low ceiling. The wound at his side had split open through the seal patch and packed itself with grey-black threads that moved against one another like nests of tiny wire. His neck wound had gone dark all around the collar. One eye tracked the camera, the other twitched under a wash of leaking blood. "Captain," he said. His voice was still his own. Grace turned away from the screen and covered her mouth with both hands. "Mason," I said, "step back from the hatch." "I'm trying." He looked down at his left hand as if surprised to find it there. The fingers had fused together around 3 med injectors and a strip of splint brace. Boone's pistol rose into frame from the side camera. "Open the lock. 1 clean shot." Mason looked at Boone. "Give me a minute." The grey threads in his side wound tightened. A tool from the deck, small hemostat or injector clamp I could not tell, lifted and snapped into the flesh near his ribs as if drawn by a magnet under the skin. Mason jerked and struck the hatch again, harder this time. I stood up from the cradle. Grace caught my arm. "Nolan!" I had not heard her use my first name before. The sound of it settled something instead of shaking it loose. "He bought us time in the carrier," I said. Boone's voice came raw through the speaker. He's losing the fight. I went down the ladder with the sidearm drawn. Boone stood at the inner barrier, pistol aimed through the small inspection port. The bay beyond had turned slick with blood and med gel. Mason had sunk to one knee. The fused hand with the injectors kept opening and closing against the deck. His good eye found me through the port. Don't let it take the gate. I opened the inner barrier. Boone turned on me. Damn you! Mason came up in a convulsion driven by something past pain. He hit the barrier shoulder first with enough force to dent it. The side wound had opened wide and packed itself with metal from the deck. Bone showed under writhing grey filaments. His mouth stretched around words that would not form. I fired twice into the chest because I was too slow to trust a headshot in that cramped dark. It did not stop him. Boone fired once past my shoulder and took the left eye. Mason sagged against the barrier, still moving. I stepped in and put the muzzle against the center of his forehead. When he dropped, the injectors fused into his hand kept twitching for several seconds after the rest of him had gone quiet. Boone lowered the pistol. You see why I wanted it earlier? I looked at Mason on the deck, at the wall of the bay marked by his blood, at the medic's bag overturned in the corner, its contents spilled into red slicks and loose gauze. I see the whole bill, I said. The bay had to stay sealed after that. Boone helped me drag the body into the spent ammo locker, and I dogged the door shut with a wrench through the wheel because my hands had started to lose accuracy. A prickling numbness ran up from the old suit rip under my right sleeve. I ignored it while I still could. Back in the cockpit, Grace already had the freight panel line on local challenge. Her cut cheek had crusted dark. She sounded like she had spent 20 years talking pilots through bad weather and fuel loss. This is Senior Chief Grace Holloway, Civil Traffic Control, badge mark 714 Charlie, she said. I am requesting emergency ground entry at Freightmouth 12 under Quarantine Bypass Authority. A machine voice answered from the mountain above us. Badge acknowledged. Authority expired by Marshal transfer. Grace leaned toward the mic. Marshal controller dead. I watched her bleed out in Cargo Tower 2. Freightmouth 12 remains under civil emergency code if any controller with direct line survives. Surviving controller confirmed. Quarantine override in effect. Submit bioscan for approaching personnel. Grace looked at me. Boone understood before she spoke. He gave one tight nod and unsealed his collar for the scanner node. Grace did the same. I held my wrist under the panel light. The suit patch at the forearm had darkened under the foam. Thin grey lines ran up under the skin toward the elbow. Grace said nothing. The scanner beam passed over Boone, over Grace, over me. Contaminant load detected, the mountain voice said. Ground unit contains active necro-salvage markers. Full entry denied. Boone swore. Grace slammed a fist against the panel. Run compartment isolation, she snapped. We can split the bay. Contaminant profile on primary pilot compartment. Freightmouth 12 may open for uncontaminated personnel only. Ground unit must remain outside quarantine line. Outside. The word sat in the cockpit like another body. For one ugly second I saw my own kitchen in Redstone housing 15 years earlier. Boots by the door. Ore dust in the sink, a work roster clipped to the fridge, and the recall notice laid across it like a verdict. Come back in uniform. Come help take the world you used to work. I had obeyed because men always do when enough other men are already obeying. Now the mountain itself was telling me what I had become. The wall of dead had reached the lower switchback. I saw it through the rear camera as a rolling front of limbs and plate and ruined faces grinding up the road we had just climbed. Shells from buried weapons burst at random inside it. One blast tore a crater through the front rank, and the crater filled at once with more joined dead. Grace got hold of herself before Boone did. There's a power trunk on the freight face, she said fast. Manual coupling. The blast earlier must have knocked it loose. If we align it, the freight door will open enough for a man to pass. Maybe two at a squeeze. Then do it, Boone said. It's outside. I was already moving. The power trunk jutted from the rock beside the freight mouth like a broken spine, thick cables hanging free where a service vehicle or shell had ripped the connector block sideways. I brought the walker up nose first to the door and braced the hull against the concrete lip. The old freight mouth sat recessed under a slab of rock and steel, 4 stories high, sealed by a segmented door thick enough to keep ore dust and weather out for a century. A narrow maintenance ledge ran beside the trunk. "Grace," I said over local, "get down there with Boone. I'll hold position." She caught my shoulder on her way past. Boone did not speak at all. He had the pistol in one hand and Mason's medbag slung over the other shoulder. Some men talk more when they accept death in the room. Boone had gone the other way. They climbed down the access ladder into a hail of loose rubble and crossed to the trunk while I turned the walker half sideways across the switchback. The wall below kept rising. Individual infected had started to outrun the mass. A shape with both legs replaced by joined loader arms pulled itself upslope in savage lunges. Another wore part of a traffic drone across its chest, rotor blades still turning enough to kick dust from the road. I opened with the right arm gun and cut the front runners down. The feed count dropped into the last 30 rounds. "Coupling's bent," Grace said over comm. "Boone, put your shoulder under that side. Higher, higher." The freight door gave a dull, internal thud. "Again," she said. The wall hit the lower leg of the walker in a rush of bodies and scrap. Impact alarms flared. Joined arms clawed for handholds. A rifle trapped in the mass fired point-blank into my shin armor until the barrel burst. I stamped down and crushed 3 bodies into the road. More climbed over them at once. "Door's moving," Grace said. "Nolan, keep that line off us." The last heavy shells were for collapsed charges rigged into the upper retaining wall. Old mine defense work tied into the port's wartime plans. My panel still showed 3 fireable if the feed would cycle. I sent one into the shelf above the dead wall. Stone burst loose and buried the front rank in a red avalanche. The wall slowed for maybe 10 seconds. Then the dead inside the rockfall started climbing over their own, crushed. "Through," Boone said. "Grace, go." "Together." "Move." I risked a glance left. The freight door had opened a gap no wider than a truck cab at the base. Grey light spilled from inside. Grace turned in the opening and looked up at me. Boone stood behind her with one hand on the inner rail. My right forearm had gone numb from elbow to glove. Grey filaments showed under the skin at the wrist when the panel light caught them. The suit patch had bought me time and nothing more. "Get inside," I said. Grace did not move. "You can still back off and run the outer shelf. There may be another—" "There isn't." The wall slammed the walker again, higher this time, bodies climbing onto the lower hull and shoulder. One of the bigger fused masses had reached the road, a tower of dead packed around the broken frame of a field gun, wheel rims turning through flesh as it came. It struck the walker's right side and dented the armor inward with a scream of tortured metal. The engine note dropped and came back rough. Boone shoved Grace toward the gap. She seized his sleeve and then let go. 1 beat later, she ran through the opening. Boone followed. He turned once, lifted 2 fingers in a fast, rough salute, and vanished into the port. "Inner door in 30 seconds, Grace said over comm. Her breath came hard now from the climb inside. "Nolan, the retaining line charges still answer on your grid? If the cable survived. Then you can bury the ascent, along with me." Silence on the line for one short span. Then Grace said, "You knew the road. You got us here. You do what the road asks now." That came close enough to prayer that I almost laughed. I jammed the walker deeper into the freight mouth and locked the knee joints. The machine protested in a chorus of strain and cracked mounts. The hull filled the lower half of the entrance. Anything coming through would have to climb over 300 tons of failing armor first. The wall of dead hit in full. Bodies poured over the lower hull and across the canopy glass. Faces smeared blood and dust over the armored viewports. Hands with shell rims for nails beat at the seams. Weapon parts trapped in the mass spat round sparks and fragments. The bigger fused thing with the field gun struck again and got one wheel assembly over the walker's right hip. I fired the last arm gun burst into its center and shredded enough tissue to drop the gun frame sideways. The dead around it absorbed the wreck and kept climbing. I fired the second heavy shell into the upper retaining line. The shelf above the switchback blew open. Whole sections of road, rail, and old ore conveyor housing came down on the ascent. The collapse crushed the first ranks, buried the field gun mass to its axle, and filled the air with red dust thick enough to hide half the world. Through that dust I still saw movement. Always more movement. "Inner door sealed," Grace said. Her voice had changed. Concrete and distance had reached it. "We are in quarantine. Cargo stack secure." "Good." I cut the line because any word after that would have broken something I still needed. The cockpit had grown hot and close. Warning lights painted the panels red and amber. Reactor heat climbing. Coolant loss severe. Right leg actuator failure imminent. Life support in override with filters spent. My right hand had lost 2 fingers to numbness, though they still moved when I forced them. Outside, the dead covered the walker from shin to shoulder. The machine shifted under their weight and mine, groaning against the freight face. One face stared at me through the cracked outer glass. Female, young, half the scalp gone, one eye replaced by a loader bolt sunk straight into the socket. Her mouth worked around a strip of black cable. When she struck the canopy, the bolt in her eye sparked. The whole war had come down to this view. We had crossed worlds to take a starport. The port had held. The assault had broken. Men on both sides had died in rows and heaps and fire. Then the dead had risen and made a third army out of all the careful waste human war always leaves behind. Flesh, metal, signals, procedure, rescue systems, medical tags, guns built to answer movement. Every useful thing turned inward and fed back into the ruin. I had helped build a little piece of this world long before I helped break it. That thought mattered. It kept the end from shrinking into pure terror. I knew the grades, knew the rock, knew where the old mine company had hidden charges in the retaining lines during the labor riots 20 years before the army came. Knew how much force the switchback shelf could take before the whole ascent peeled away into the canyon. That knowledge had once moved ore. It would move the dead now. The last fireable shell sat in the rack under my left hand. The core overload keys waited under a cracked safety cover by my knee. I armed both. A blow split the outer glass on the right viewport. The crack crawled inward in a white branching web. Grey paste seeped through one edge. The infected woman with the bolt in her eye disappeared under a wash of bodies. A different shape rose in her place, broad and low, made of 5 or 6 joined torsos wrapped around a Walker pilot seat with its harness strap still flailing. It heaved itself at the hull and stuck there, adding weight, adding pressure, adding one more obscene use for a thing made to hold a human body safe in war. I keyed external broadcast one final time. Highport quarantine. This is Captain Nolan Hollister. Heavy Walker core. Freight ascent compromised. I am sealing the route. Keep your launches moving. Static answered. Then Grace came through anyway from somewhere inside the mountain. One launch remains on pad 3. Use it. We will. I sent the final heavy shell into the support stack above the freight mouth. Stone split. Steel beams sheared. Old ore rails folded downward through a cloud of red dust and concrete fragments. The upper face of the ascent started to come away. The dead on my hull thrashed and tightened their grip as if some buried part of them understood what was coming. I took the reactor keys and turned them together. The core warning tone started low and rose. Heat climbed through the cockpit floor into my boots. Panels went dark one by one as power routed inward for a death no training sim had ever tried to sell as noble. It was work to the end. A job left, and I was in the one place where the job could be done. The Walker settled deeper into the freight mouth, its joints locked under heat and load. Stone rained down around the hull. The right viewport blew inward in a spray of armored glass. Dust and body matter burst across the cockpit. Grey filaments on my forearm tightened with sudden pain so sharp that white light flashed across my vision. I kept one hand on the controls anyway. Fool habit. Driver habit. Keep the machine lined up until the very end. A white spear of engine flame rose beyond the cargo towers, far above and left through the cracked canopy. Pad 3. One launch. It climbed through the dust and the dark, carrying whoever Grace could stuff inside and whatever future Highport still deserved. The ascent came down. Rock hit the hull from above with the force of a planet remembering its own weight. Steel girders punched through the mass of dead and pinned them to the walker's back. Concrete slabs sealed the lower switchback. More stone followed, then more, until the world outside the cockpit shrank to a red, choking blur, and then to darkness broken only by the reactor glare building under my seat. I thought of ore convoys in winter light, chains on frozen road, coffee in a dented thermos warm between my palms, men waving from loader cabs at shift change. I thought of the first day I had taken a hall crawler through Redstone and felt its weight answer my hands. I thought of Mason asking for a minute, Boone hauling me upright in the cut, Grace turning at the door. I thought with a tired kind of gratitude that the road had finally asked me for everything, and I had enough left to give. The core reached its final tone. I put my palm on the main control brace as if I could steady the walker through the last second, the same way I had steadied it on bad roads all my life. Then I let the mountain take the rest.